or comments. My name is Jason Schlon. I'm actually standing in for John Daniel to represent Delaware State University as a leader on the grant that's funding these projects. And as I'm talking, I'm still admitting people, so people are joining as we go. I'm just doing a quick introduction, and then I'm going to turn it over. At Delaware State University, I work with the Northeast SARE program. And just to do the quick 30-second spiel on SARE, it's Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education. It's a national USDA program that has tons of educational resources at SARE.org, SARE.org, videos, fact sheets, on pretty much any topic you could think of. They also do grants, which are distributed in 4 regions. And you can find out all that information also by going to SARE.org and then going to the region that you're in. But the grants can be farmer and rancher grants or larger research and education grants, or all different types of programs. So with that, I'm going to use it as a segue to turn it over to my SARE counterpoint at West Virginia University. Oh, I almost said West Virginia State. Sorry, Barbara. So take it away, Barbara.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Barbara Liedl. We're going to get into the program right away and give you some background. Oh, Jason, just so you know, it's really funny that when your video isn't on, we see a picture of John and his family. So if anybody's wondering what John Clendaniel looks like, just look at the picture that has Jason's name in there. So, all right. So my part of our project has been to work on dealing with COVID-19 during with produce safety on there. So, ooh, hang tight, made a mistake going there first. All right. So, oh yeah, that's right. It's early in the morning in there. All right. So we're gonna give you a little bit of background first, talk a little bit about adult education in there. So these are the 8 institutions, 1890s, that are involved, as well as the AEA, the Association of Extension Administrators, that put the grant together. We also have all the rest of the 1890 land grants, the historically Black land grants, if you're not familiar with them, are actually also part of this in helping us deploy all the different trainings. My part is with produce safety. We do have others coming up. Next week, there's going to be a food chain train the trainer one if you're interested. And there will be some meat processing videos that are going to be released on there. So ground rules, Jason's already told you, mute your microphone if you would. At some point, we'll open that up for questions. In addition, if you have questions as we're going, put
Barbara,
them in the what?
Sorry to interrupt. I've got somebody who says they can't hear you on the speaker.
Can't hear me on my speaker. All right, thanks. I will go back and figure out why they can't hear me.
I can hear you.
Okay, yeah, because mine should be coming. Cindy, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
I
Whoever
can hear you.
Whoever wrote it might want to check your settings on there. All right, so going back in there. All right, so here's where we're at, and then so ask any questions in the chat box. Cindy or I will be following along in the chat box, and Jason's backing us up on it. The plan is to do this introduction and a little bit on adult education. We're also going to tell you about shared resources we're going to have up at the AEA website. They're not there yet, but hopefully next week. You will get a link to that since you registered for this once you've filled out your evaluation. Not my choice, John's. So that's how that's going to work. We'll also have 4 modules, A and B, and then we'll do a bio break, and then we'll do C and D in there. So as I said, I'm Barbara Liedl. I'm at West Virginia State University. My main gig is breeding tomatoes, but I got involved in produce safety now about 6, 7 years ago in there. And because I work with fresh produce for my job, it seemed really important. And so I started getting involved, and I had known Cindy, but we started doing some trainings and we were, well, I still am, she was until she retired, part of the West Virginia food safety training team in there. So Cindy, why don't you introduce yourself?
Good morning. Yes, I was working with the folks in West Virginia. They have a very strong training team that's full of lots of extension educators and other affiliated folks in the produce safety industry. So this was just a great way to kind of continue that extension in terms of allowing our growers to incorporate some of the food safety produce related strategies and apply it to COVID. So Barbara and I worked on this project, and we're excited to do the final presentation here to hopefully give you some tools that you can use with your folks that you're working with out in the field.
Okay, so um, the, come on. The plan is that for shared resources, you will get all the modules you're going to see here today. There will also be in the notes section, notes and resources for every slide to help give you some background. So you'll actually have that. We will also give you all those modules in a PDF format. This is very similar if you've had Produce Safety Alliance training, that it's very similar in the format to that. Doesn't require that you have PSA. We just like the model, and so that's what we went with it. I've also taken the resource list out of every module slides and put it into one where it's grouped by topic, and that will be available as a PDF and it will be clickable. So if you want to go to any of the resources, you'll be able to go there directly. We have a flat farm layout and the area off the farm that you'll see us using here, and I'm providing that through, it's in Excel. So if you want to personalize that to your situation or change some things, you'll have the ability to do that. We'll also have some COVID-19 screening sheets. You'll see that, we'll talk about that later. There's also going to be a training flyer in Word that you can personalize and use for yours, an agenda, checklist, an attendance workbook in there that you can use. And we're going to also keep any questions that come into us, start a FAQ and have that posted up there so that we can add to anything. We'll also be providing a certificate template that you can use to give to your growers so that they've got documentation that they went to the training. You will get that as well once we get through all the trainings in there. So I'm going to let Cindy take over on this next bit. So Cindy, it's your turn.
Yeah, so just a couple of points that we want to reiterate. First of all, this is not PSA. It is not GIP GAP. It's not any of those trainings. It's designed to be an addition to. One of the things that we recognized early on and we have seen come to fruition recently is that COVID, we've been effective as a nation and actually tackling that issue. But what could we do in terms of providing this program that was COVID specific, but also gave you strategies that would allow you to deal with the next pandemic? And that could be a local food safety threat to produce, or it could be more nationwide. So the whole idea is that what we're going to ask you to look at is an action plan that is very flexible, and granted, it is tuned into what's happening now, but it also hopefully can be used in the future despite the fact that we hope there isn't another incident. So with those disclaimers, a lot of our folks I noticed in the chat are actually coming from an extension education background. So this is going to be a lot of review. But one of the things that we found working with farmers and adult students is the need to understand that they're busy people, that their learning is different. It really needs to be tied more to the whole farm in terms of their goals with proper profitability, processing, and that there's a whole lot of dynamics that are involved in that. So just being aware that you're dealing with farmers, especially if you're looking at key seasons like harvest or planting, that this is going to be something that you're going to have to make it understandable to them. So all of the information that we presented is designed to be situational and adaptable to the farm that you're working on. The picture you see here is actually from a West Virginia agritourism operator. And obviously you've got that whole concept of production, but you're also interacting with visitors. So right now is not probably a great time for you to come on their farm and talk about what you need to do for record keeping and those kinds of things. So just understanding and being cognizant of your learners. Also understand who your audience is in terms of language, in terms of technology, just recognizing that there may be challenges, and that's why we've tried to give you lots of different strategies in each of the areas so that they can adapt it and make it work for what their situation is. You know, the other variable we have to add to all this is whether you're doing agritourism or you're just a production farm, um, which is a large scale, is looking at your staff and where they're at. Look at who you had last year, who were your leaders, who had a difficult time with the whole COVID protocols, in terms of identifying those that could help you be models and move forward in terms of educating their peers. Next slide. So, why are you here for the next hopefully 3 to 3.5 hours, and who are you going to deliver this to? So you're going to have to convince the operator that this is incredibly important information and critical to their success in the coming year. We know things are rapidly changing, and so this training hopefully allows folks to develop a comfort level as it relates to COVID enhanced practices that they're already adding to their produce operation. So we also know that there are several other programs out there that are certifications or training like PSA. If you're doing a GAP program, a good agricultural practices program, or a third party audit, we know that there are training requirements and yearly updates. So this would fit in nicely in terms of providing that in real time. There's a lot more buyer requirements. We know that the supply chain was totally disrupted during COVID, and that goes especially to produce with the perishability issues and those kinds of things. So those buyers are starting to look at that whole system of how they approve vendors. So you may need to deliver this training to your staff to meet those needs. Those of you that have employees and visitors that are coming on the farm, it's going to be important to revisit your policies and procedures concerning contact and also their personal protection. You're going to be able to improve consumer and employee communication just because you're aware and you're providing them with updated information and addressing their needs in terms of their safety and also those that come in contact with your product. We like the idea of folks being on an individual farm to deliver this training. We know that it's sometimes difficult at this point, but there's nothing that can replace the actual transference of the knowledge to what they're doing on the farm. So if you have the opportunity to use their farm as the classroom, we highly encourage that, understanding that there are some limitations at this point. And also, we want to help you build that food safety culture within your operation, understanding that your students, or in this case, the employees that you're working with, are able to communicate with one another in a common language, but also that they feel comfortable identifying possible areas of concern, and really contributing to that farm assessment that we talk about at the beginning of each of the modules. Next slide. So online is a whole different story. I'm learning every day. I'm probably behind the curve because I wasn't in on the beginning of COVID and how a lot of you folks had to do the pivot to the online learning. So those are some suggestions. A lot of those came from the PSA. They do a lunch chat series, but that whole idea of kind of providing that experience as best you can, using the chat room, using the annotation, Jotboard, all of those tools. If you're delivering it online, again, just trying to engage your participants. Next slide. Next slide. Oh, there we go. What do your employees and your participants want to attend? Obviously, the material and what the information that's currently coming out in relation to COVID in their operation. We also encourage folks to use the concepts as part of the planning and learning process to build that culture within an operation, but also have it be very participatory in terms of employees. They're going to be the best ones on the line to know what works and what doesn't work. They're usually very willing to learn and be part of the process. So if you can provide the platform for that to happen, we all know that that is experientially based as opposed to delivering it via the internet. So anything that you can do to motivate folks internally and also to carry that out into action is a higher level of learning. And I know all of you are pretty familiar with all that in terms of your extension education, but just remembering that on the farm, it can be the best classroom in the world. So capitalize on those tidbits. Next slide. So there are sources that we used. We will do this throughout the whole program. As Barbara said, she went ahead and compiled the bibliography. It's fairly extensive. And these were the kind of things that we pulled out of that whole concept of adult education. Some of you may have seen that. So with that, just continue your best practices and see how you can weave in produce safety in the COVID world. Next slide.
Next talk now.
Next time. Yeah. How's that, Barbara?
Good job. So, anyhow, so I'm going to start off with Module A, and just to give any of you who've got produce safety training through PSA, their modules are numbered. We made a specific choice not to number them so that it's easier to see this as a different standalone, just an additional training that supplements in there. So our modules are A, B, C, and D in there. All right, so we're going to talk in this first module about basically the pathogen SarCoV2 and the disease COVID-19, the difference between that, how that affects everything that goes in. So learning outcomes, differentiating between them, common ways they can be spread, how to reduce the risks of SarCoV2, and then the value of implementing any of those strategies. As Cindy's already said, we want to keep reiterating, this is not a replacement for PSA. We really tried to develop this with the idea that even if you didn't have the PSA training, this still is going to supply you that additional piece you need to help with your growers and producers in terms of implementing practices that are going to help with dealing with SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19, but also to make you start thinking and get them to start thinking about, okay, so if we have another pandemic that comes, can we have things in place, that lessons we've learned from dealing with this, and be able to pivot more quickly the next time? This is also not a replacement for recommendations from the federal, state, or local health departments, or again, recommendations from the CDC. You will hear us reiterate several times throughout the training that the you need to be telling the growers and producers they need to stay in touch with that, because that is a changing option out there. Just heard some new information this week on PSA training about some changes at the CDC in terms of recommendations. So as we said, this is an additional training in there to account for SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19. Why do we care about COVID-19 and a grower's agricultural operation? Basically, it's a risk mitigation practice to lower the risk of getting COVID-19 in their agricultural operation. And again, they're going to know their operation and their practices the best, and they're going to have to decide what risk strategies to take to lower those, because what one grower does is not what another grower does. Somebody may do agritourism along with their production in the fall, another one may not. And so it's going to be, there is no one size fits all. The other one is that, you know, actions that are taken now or not taken now will directly impact food safety, the health of your staff and the customers, and ultimately financial viability. Some farms were able to pivot very successfully and had really great years. Others really struggled. So if we can find ways to help them so that they struggle less this year and have plans in place, so if we hit something like this again, that we can work with them to pivot more quickly, that would be another one. All right, so what is SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19? SARS-CoV-2 is the actual virus that causes the disease COVID-19. So you will hear Cindy and I both separate the differences. When we're talking about trying to get the virus off a surface, we'll be talking about SARS-CoV-2, how the virus came to be on the surface could be due to somebody who has the disease COVID-19 and is releasing through sneezing or the aerosol, the respiratory droplets, the virus SARS-CoV-2 because they have COVID-19. So where does the name SARS come from? It's severe acute respiratory syndrome, which with all of us know after living through a year of this, that's definitely what it is, acute respiratory. This is actually part of a family of other viruses. There's other coronaviruses, other coronaviruses in there. And it is, they're all SARS associated. So there is a previous SARS coronavirus, which is why this is number 2 in there. So there are a host of them. So COVID-19 got the name for the disease. The CO is for corona. The VI is for virus. D is disease. And 19 was the year it was identified. So that's how COVID-19 came to be. And as we are all now familiar, symptoms include all those listed there, especially that loss of taste and smell with that in there. So, so how the virus is going to spread, that's going to be the main thing we're talking about, because what we're looking at is how to reduce the transmission of that virus in there, and how to also, if somebody gets COVID-19, how to deal with that if it's staff on your farm. Okay, come on. So there are 4 main ways of transmission of SARS-CoV-2. The most common and the one you've heard the most about is person to person in there. So that's going to be the one we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about in there, but this is going to be the one where people have coughing, talking, yelling, singing, and they release, if they have COVID-19, they will release respiratory droplets like we all do, but theirs will actually have SARS-CoV-2 in it. And if somebody else is in the way, they can get it in their mouth, their nose, their eyes. It's the easiest modes of how they get transmission into them. And then could take on and create the disease inside of them. In there. The second way is surface to person transmission. This is possible, and we'll talk about this a little more, and we still will talk about sanitizing, but it's possible, but there are actually no reports of an actual surface getting contaminated and somebody getting contaminated from actually touching the surface and making them get the disease. There are a lot of great reports on how long SARS-CoV-2 lasts on different types of surfaces under different conditions. It's all laboratory testing in there. The other part of this is we really can't do that test to have the surface with the SARS-CoV-2 and ask somebody to go in and test to see if they get it. That's an unethical experiment, and there would be some concerns about somebody doing that in there. So there's an issue with that. The other thing that also comes out of this is the SARS-CoV-2 virus is very differently structured than other viruses that are problems like norovirus. Because of the structure of it with those spikes on it, it makes it very, it's a lot easier to actually clean and sanitize and get rid of it, whereas norovirus is a lot more difficult. So the surface to person we'll talk about, it's possible, but it's not, we don't have any reports. There are also some rare situations where we have animal to person or person to animal transmission. I've read a couple where an owner got COVID-19 and it got transmitted to a cat or a dog in there, very rare. There are a few also as well where zoo animals have gotten it from obviously caretakers in there. And we'll talk more about it, but basically it's cats, dogs, ferrets, fruit bats, hamsters, tree shrews, and some other mammals that can be infected. They don't know all of them, but they are not concerned with laboratory mice, don't get it. Pigs, chickens, and ducks don't seem to become infected or spread the infection in there. So it's, again, rare, but it is possible in there. Last one, produce to person. That one, there are actually no reports of, and we will come back to that, but worldwide, there are absolutely no reports of anybody getting sick from produce or produce packaging. When they go back and look, it's generally due to some kind of person-to-person contact. Also, to be clear, if you talk to the organizations nationally and internationally involved in food safety, they don't consider SARS-CoV-2 a food safety hazard because when it enters the human body in there through a gastrointestinal, so where you're eating food, it doesn't infect the organs and tissues. It doesn't make you sick. In fact, ingesting it kills the virus. So it's not a true food safety hazard. It's more of a person-to-person hazard on there. So we will give you in the resources the links to the piece on the produce to person. We have the joint one of the USDA, FDA, and CDC making that citation, as well as an international organization as well. So the big one is transmission of SARS-CoV-2 person to person. And that is a viral transfer via the respiratory droplets or aerosol from somebody that actually has COVID-19 in there. And as I mentioned earlier in there,
call from 9.
Sorry. As I mentioned earlier, this is going to be something where you can transmit it sneezing, talking, singing, yelling, and it's usually only travels within a few feet. That's where they came up with the 6 feet minimum, though I hear there's some recommendations to maybe take that social distancing down to as few as 3. I think you're going to have to watch and see what your local health and state health departments are recommending, as well as what the CDC will come out with. But the 6 feet is to keep you far enough away that the vast majority of those aerosol droplets, as you see in the image there, are not coming in contact with somebody else in there. And the other part of this is the masks that they started recommending sometime after the pandemic started is basically there to trap the respiratory droplets in case you're the one who has COVID-19, and to keep it so that there's fewer of them going out into the air to get to somebody else or to get onto surfaces. So some of the resources that we actually have that will be available, both within the slides and as well as a separate PDF, are going to be to posters or images or links to websites so that you can use those and share them with your growers and producers as well. So this one on here shows you some of the main ways to stop the spread of COVID-19, the SarCoV2. You see the 6-foot distance, the masks in there, and the covering the nose with it. We'll talk later about the cleaning and disinfecting, and again, come back to hand washing as well as not touching your eyes, nose, and mouth, because that's the easiest way for the virus to get into the system. All right, so the surface transmission of SARS-CoV-2, it can survive on surfaces and could play an indirect role in transmission. Again, the lifespan of the virus on different surfaces varies quite a lot. And what you even see here is based on one study. Other studies have different temperatures, different relative humidities, and that will affect how long that the SARS-CoV-2 lasts. My sister lives in northern Canada, and they were busing their students where they live. It is very cold, a lot of humidity in the air, and they were getting transmission of it. And it was basically because the air droplets were hanging longer in the air. So when the kids would go off the bus, if anybody had it, they would walk into it and have that so they could get the transmission, even though they kept them socially distant. So, so it's understanding it's doing a holistic view of how this could transmit and trying to lower those risk factors on there. So it can be transferred by touch, but the virus actually has to end up migrating into a cell to infect it to start getting the disease to happen in a human or animal. It does, if you've got the virus out on a surface, it does become less infectious over time, but it's going to depend, as I said earlier, material, temperature, and other factors with it. Come on. Pet and livestock transmission of SARS-CoV-2. Again, rare transfers of this. There's really no evidence of animals playing a major role in spreading SARS-CoV-2, but basically the recommendation is if somebody actually gets sick, to keep them away from their pets just in case they would transmit the disease to those animals in there. That would also go not just for your household pets, but also any kind of livestock that this could infect in there. So it's basically just doing the best practices in there with it. Okay. So last but not least, food and food packaging in there. Again, no cases. This is the one I know everybody early on with the pandemic, they were getting their Lysol wipes and anything they got from sent to them or picked up at the grocery pickup, they were leaving it out in their car. Not a good thing to leave your groceries out in the car for a certain amount of time because you have perishables. or they were wiping it all down with Clorox wipes or Lysol wipes in there. That was, at the time, we didn't know any better on what controlled the virus. We know better now. We don't need to do that. That does not need to be a recommendation in there. And please make sure nobody is washing their fresh produce with soap and water. Not good. And please, please don't use bleach. I didn't think that was possible. Turns out some people did, thinking that that would kill any virus. So again, no cases that are reported from food or food packaging, that the transmission has all been due to some person-to-person transmission in there. Okay, so why have this whole training that we've got? Because PSA does a masterful job of doing all the stuff on produce safety. Well, here's why. All the other human pathogens we talk about when we do produce safety training for FSMA and GAP are basically human pathogens that are transmitted through the fecal oral route. So as we like to say, the poop to mouth route in there. And so SarCoV2 is not majorly transmitted that way. So it is a totally different pathogen type than what we've been trained into. So that's why to have this standalone, because this is a different route. So we have to look at different risks to the farm and the farm workers on there. So it's spread through respiratory droplets. It is not a fecal oral route as the main thing. So could be rarely, but that's not the main way we're transmitting it. So we have to use different strategies to address the spread of the virus, and then also how to deal with people who are sick with COVID-19. So this is the big game changer and why to have this standalone piece. So we're going to follow something similar to what PSA does, which is you need to assess the produce safety risks first, implement practices, monitor them, apply corrective actions, and keep records. Now, is any of this required with FSMA? No. Is any of this required for GAP? No. Do you want to have this in case you might need this? If the health department calls you up and says, we had someone who said they were at your farm stand at the farmer's market the other day and they have COVID-19. How long were they in touch with your staff and what staff were there? That might be worthwhile knowing who went where, what day. If somebody came out to your farm, you find out they have it, if one of your farm workers does. So having some of this is helpful. Plus, the more important one in all of this, it's just additional, it's doing mostly what you're already doing or they're already doing in terms of training them in food safety and getting those practices and that culture in place, and maybe upping the ante in a couple of places to help reduce the risk from this particular one. But it's basically emphasizing all the good things we've been teaching on food safety. So one of the things that we really wrestled with in putting the curriculum together was having something to be more interactive, because we understand you are going to be in the situation where you might have to deliver this all online, or it might be in person if you're lucky with restrictions, or it may be some kind of hybrid. But regardless, if there's even that it's all in person, still trying to get them to think if they're not all from the same farm or if you're not out on the farm. So one of the things I came up with, and if any of you had kids and remember Flat Stanley, welcome to the Flat Farm. This is a farm we're going to come back to in some of the next modules to talk about in terms of where are risks and how can we mitigate those risks on the farm in there. So we kind of came up with one that you can use, you can modify it in there as we go along. So we're going to be looking at preventing person-to-person exposure and any place that might be contaminated with COVID-19 and trying to deal with cleaning that up in there. So we will be looking at this as we go through. So we've talked about primary way it's transmitted. That again, the big take-home message here is you don't get it from the food or the food packaging. And the second big message is that this is a different route than everything else we've been trained into from PSA. It's not the fecal oral route, it's the main route. And that food safety is going to really depend on how well we work with the growers to get them to implement risk strategies that are going to work well for them in their food safety plan. So there's our acknowledgements. You'll see that with each one in there. So Jason didn't mention it, but we actually are funded through the Rapid Response to Novel Coronavirus Impacts Across Food and Agricultural Systems out of the USDA.